The stagecoach rolls into Crale's Bend just past noon, trailing a long ribbon of dust that hangs in the still October air long after the wheels stop turning. The town receives it the way it receives most things, without ceremony, without hurry, without particular interest. A dog lifts its head from the shade of the general store porch. Two men outside the saloon pause their conversation just long enough to watch. Then the door swings open, and Eleanor Voss steps down onto Texas soil for the first time in her life. She is 26 years old, and she carries everything she owns in a single canvas bag that she holds against her side, like something worth protecting. Her dress is grey-blue, practical, without a single ruffle to recommend it. Her hair is dark and pulled back with a bone comb that belonged to her mother. Her boots are worn at the heel. Her chin is level. The driver climbs down from the box and pulls a leather satchel from the luggage rail. He reads the names of the passengers aloud as he hands over their belongings, a habit of the route, lazy and indifferent. When he reaches hers, his voice carries, "Eleanor Voss, Crale's Bend, contract bride." The words drop into the afternoon like stones into still water. She feels them land. She keeps her expression exactly where it is, composed, unreadable, while a burst of laughter rolls out of the open saloon door like smoke. "Another catalogue woman," someone says, loud enough to be heard from the street. "Lawrence must be desperate these days." The driver doesn't even glance up. He moves on to the next name. Ellie picks up her bag, adjusts the strap across her shoulder, and walks toward the land registry office, at the far end of the main street, because that is what the letter told her to do. She does not look toward the saloon. She does not hurry. The office smells like old paper and lamp oil. A ceiling fan turns slowly overhead, stirring nothing. The clerk behind the counter is a narrow man with ink-stained fingers and the particular expression of someone who considers his time more valuable than yours. He takes the contract she slides across the counter, reads it with the careful attention of a man looking for errors, and begins copying the names into his registry ledger. It is while he writes that she notices the other man. He stands near the window, well-dressed for this town, with a dark coat that didn't come from any shop on this street, and boots with silver hardware at the toe. He is watching the clerk's hand move across the page. When the clerk writes the name Merritt, the man's attention sharpens in a way that is almost imperceptible. Almost. His jaw tightens. His gaze lifts briefly toward the window, then returns to his own carefully neutral expression. Ellie files the observation away without reacting to it. She thanks the clerk, tucks her copy of the registered contract into her bag, and steps back out into the heat. She waits on the boardwalk outside for 19 minutes. She counts them. Cole Merritt arrives without announcement. He comes around the corner of the feed store leading a bay horse and a wagon with one cracked side panel, and he stops when he sees her. He looks at the bag first, then at her boots, then at her face. His own face gives her nothing. Not coldness exactly, not hostility, but the complete and total absence of welcome. He is taller than she expected, dark-haired with threads of early silver at the temples and eyes the color of burnt wood that take in everything and offer nothing in return. A scar crosses his right eyebrow at an angle, pale against the Texas weathered skin. He wears no decoration, carries no extra word. "You're lighter than the last one," he says, looking at her single bag. "There was no last one," she says. "The agency told me this is the first contract you've submitted." He looks at her for a moment without responding. Then he turns toward the wagon. "Get in." She gets in. The road from Crale's Bend to the Redstone Ranch is 11 miles of flat, dry land that doesn't apologize for itself. The scrub grass runs in every direction under a sky so wide and pale it seems to press the earth flat. There are no trees to speak of, only the occasional cluster of mesquite, low and grey-green, bent permanently eastward by the prevailing wind. The wagon creaks. The horse moves at a pace that suggests experience rather than urgency. Cole Merritt says nothing for the first 4 miles. Ellie uses the silence to watch the land. She is from Ohio, where the horizon ends at a tree line or a hillside, where distance is always interrupted. Here it is uninterrupted. It takes some adjusting. After a long while he speaks without looking at her. "You'll manage the house, cooking, preserving what needs doing inside. I manage the land and the hands. What's mine stays mine. What's yours stays yours." "Understood," she says, I don't need conversation." "Neither do I," she says. He glances at her then, just briefly, just sideways, and says nothing more. The ranch appears on the horizon as a dark shape against the pale sky before it becomes a place. As they draw closer, it assembles itself into something real, a house of dark weathered timber, low and wide, with a covered porch running the full front length. A barn to the left, painted red, the paint peeling at the corners. A stone well in the center of the yard, fencing of cedar posts and wire stretching east and west as far as she can see. It is not beautiful, but it is solid in a way that feels deliberate, like something built to last rather than to impress. 2 men are in the yard when the wagon rolls through the gate. The older one, thick through the shoulders, with a greyed beard and the slow, careful movements of someone who has worked the same land for a long time, stops what he is doing and watches them arrive with an expression that reveals nothing. "Darnell," Cole says, stepping down. "This is Mrs. Voss." The man named Darnell nods once. He has eyes that are direct without being open, the eyes of someone who has learned to see without being seen seeing. The younger hand, Pete, is somewhere around 19, with an honest face and the permanent squint of someone who spends most of his time under the sun. He tips his hat to her with a quick, unself-conscious grin. "Mum, welcome to Redstone." She thanks him. Darnell has already gone back to his work. Cole carries her bag inside without asking if she wants him to, sets it at the foot of the stairs, and leads her through the house in the manner of a man completing a task. The kitchen first, functional, clean in the particular way of a space maintained by someone who doesn't clutter, but missing the details that transform a room into something lived in. Then the back room used for supply storage, the staircase. Her room at the end of the upper hall, small with a narrow window, a cot, a folded quilt and a hook behind the door. "Blankets in the chest," he says. He turns to go. "Mr. Merritt." He stops. She nods toward the hall. "What's behind the locked door at the end of the corridor?" He doesn't answer immediately. When he does, his voice has the particular flatness of a man closing a subject. "Storage." He goes downstairs. His boots on the steps are even, unhurried, final. Helly stands in the doorway of her room and looks toward the locked door. The key is not in the lock. There is no dust on the knob, which means it has been touched recently. She files this away too, and goes downstairs to find the kitchen. Supper that first evening is functional and nearly silent. Cole sits at the head of the table. She sits to his left. Darnell and Pete eat at the smaller table near the back wall, the way men eat when they have been doing so for years and don't think about it anymore. It is after the meal, while she clears the table, that she sees it. On the wall of the main room, the one visible from the kitchen doorway, hangs a map. Not a painted decoration, not a rough sketch, but a proper cadastral survey map, the kind produced by a land office with instruments and trained eyes. The territory it covers is marked in ordinary lines, the kind that show roads and property boundaries. But in the upper left quadrant, someone has drawn a border in red ink. The area it encloses is larger, significantly larger than any visible portion of this ranch. She knows maps. She spent 3 years in a Columbus print house preparing survey plates from field measurements and legal records. And the scale on this map, if read correctly, would make that red-bordered area not a small additional parcel, but a territory that stretches well beyond the redstone fence line in at least 2 directions. She looks at it for a moment longer than she means to. Then she turns away and finishes clearing the table. Cole is already on the porch. She can see the shape of him through the window, sitting in the far chair, elbows on his knees, looking at the dark land the way a man looks at something he is responsible for. She does not go out to join him. Later, when the house has gone quiet, she lies on the cot in her small room and listens to the sound of the prairie through the window. A dry, low wind moving through grass that barely bends, the occasional distant cry of something she can't identify, the creak of the house settling into the cold of the evening. It is the quietest place she has ever tried to sleep. She does not sleep for a long time. At breakfast the next morning, which she prepares before Cole comes in from the barn because the terms she agreed to were clear, and she intends to honor them, Pete comes in shaking dust from his hat with the easy energy of someone who has already been up for 2 hours. "Cold night," he says, pouring coffee. "Heard the Aldridge riders say there were surveyors out near the South Creek again yesterday. 3rd time this month." He glances toward the window, unconcerned. Nobody around here hired them. Ellie sets a plate on the table. Surveyors from where, she asks. Pete shrugs. Out of town. Nobody knows who sent them. She says nothing else, but she holds the information beside the map on the wall and the reaction of the well-dressed man in the land registry office, and she understands with the particular clarity of someone trained to read precision in lines and numbers that the land beneath this ranch is not simply what it appears to be. And someone outside these walls already knows it. The first 2 weeks at Redstone established themselves the way most things do in a place like this, not through drama, but through repetition, through the slow accumulation of mornings that begin before light and evenings that end without ceremony. Ellie learns the house the way she learned the print shop floor in Columbus, by moving through it until she stops having to think about where things are. The kitchen shelf where the salt sits too high for daily use, the back door that drags against the frame in damp weather, the particular squeak of the third stair that cannot be avoided if you come down before dawn. She adjusts each thing quietly, without announcement, the way a person adjusts to a space they intend to occupy seriously. Cole is present the way the land is present, constant, indifferent, and occasionally surprising. He is up before her every morning without exception. By the time she comes downstairs, the back door is already open, and he is somewhere out on the property doing something that requires his attention. He comes in for meals with the punctuality of a man who respects a schedule rather than the person who made it. He eats without complaint. He leaves without lingering. He does not ask her questions. She does not ask him any either. What she does instead is work. The work leaves its mark on her faster than she expected. By the end of the first week, her shoulders ache from hauling water. The skin at the base of her thumbs has begun to split from the cold iron pump handle, and twice she burns supper because she still isn't accustomed to managing a wood stove that heats unevenly in prairie wind. She adapts anyway, methodically rather than gracefully, learning the ranch the same way she once learned print machinery, through repetition, correction, and refusal to quit. And it is through the work, specifically through the ledger books she finds stacked in disorganized columns on the kitchen shelf, that she finds the first real problem. The ranch carries a debt to a man named Harding. It is not a catastrophic sum, not the kind that swallows a property whole, but it has been sitting unpaid long enough to accrue the particular danger of a small wound left untended. The terms were written in a hand that is not Cole's, on paper that predates his apparent management of the accounts by at least 2 years. Someone made an arrangement with Harding that Cole either inherited or ignored, and either way, the deadline written at the bottom of the page has already passed. She spends an evening working the numbers from 3 different angles. The ranch has the money. It is simply misallocated, spread across supply invoices, and deferred maintenance costs in a way that makes it invisible, unless you know how to look. She knows how to look. The following morning, she waits until Cole comes in for breakfast and sets the ledger open on the table beside his plate. "You have a debt with Harding," she says. "It's past due. The money to cover it exists in the accounts. It's been obscured by the way the supply invoices were recorded." Cole looks at the ledger. He looks at the numbers she has written in the margin, clean and exact. His jaw shifts slightly. "How long did that take you?" he says. "2 evenings." He is quiet for a moment. Then he picks up his fork. "I'll have Pete take payment into town by Friday." That is all he says, but he reads every number she wrote before he closes the ledger. She notices that. She also notices that when he hands the book back to her, he does not take it to the shelf himself. He leaves it in her hands. The implication is not stated. It doesn't need to be. The debt to Harding is real, but Harding himself is more than a creditor. Ellie understands this gradually through pieces, the way Pete lowers his voice slightly when the name comes up, the way Darnell's expression flattens when a rider from town passes the gate. The fact that 3 separate supply invoices, from 3 different vendors, all carry the same subtle notation in the corner, a small H inside a circle, the kind of mark a man puts on paper when he wants to track what moves through a territory he considers his. She does not say any of this to Cole yet. She is still building the picture. The man Harding sends to the north fence line arrives on a Tuesday, 11 days after Ellie's arrival. She is hanging dried herbs from the kitchen beam when she hears Pete's voice rise in the yard, uncertain, with the pitch of someone trying to be polite about something that doesn't deserve politeness. She goes to the door. The man at the gate is not a ranch hand and is not a traveler. He is dressed for town but carrying something in a leather case that does not belong in a social visit. A telescoping rod, collapsed but visible at the case's edge, and a small brass instrument that she recognizes immediately. A surveyor's level. Pete is explaining that Mr. Merritt isn't available. The man is smiling and explaining that he only needs a few minutes and it's just a routine measurement and he'll be out of the way before anyone notices. Ellie walks to the gate. She stops beside Pete, looks at the man directly and looks at the case in his hand with the focused attention of someone who doesn't need to be told twice what she is seeing. "That's a surveyor's level," she says. It is not a question. The man's smile adjusts. "Just standard equipment, ma'am." "Standard for what purpose?" "Property assessment. Routine." "Routine for whom?" she says. "No one at this property authorized a survey." "I'm just passing through, ma'am. I only need to—" "You're measuring the north fence line," she says evenly. "You've been standing at that gate long enough to get a reading on the corner post. I'd like to know who sent you and what you intend to do with what you've measured." The man looks at her with the recalibrated attention of someone who came prepared for an old man or an absent husband and found something else entirely. He closes the case. "I'll come back when Mr. Merritt is in." "Mr. Merritt will have the same questions I do," she says. "Save yourself the ride." He goes. Not fast, not rattled, but he goes. Pete lets out a slow breath beside her. "You know what that equipment was just from looking at it?" "I prepared survey maps for years," she says. "I know every instrument a surveyor carries." She turns back toward the house. Her hands are steady. Cole is visible on the far side of the east pasture, moving along the fence line. He is too far away to have seen the exchange clearly, but close enough to have seen it happen. She can tell by the way he pauses before continuing his work, a stillness that lasts about 4 seconds longer than a man pausing to check his fence. She goes inside and starts the noon meal. That evening she waits until Pete and Darnell have finished and gone before she speaks. "The man at the gate today wasn't assessing a property boundary," she says. "He was collecting measurement data. There's a difference. A boundary assessment is requested by the owner and documents existing lines. What he was doing was independent measurement of your fence position relative to something else. Something off this property." Cole sets down his coffee cup. "You're certain?" "I prepared survey maps for a printhouse for 3 years," she says. "I know what each instrument is used for." He had a level and a rod case. "That's traversal work. You use it when you're mapping a route or a resource across multiple properties." The room is quiet. Outside, the October wind moves through the dry grass with a low, continuous sound, like something breathing. "Someone is mapping the land under this ranch," she says. "Not the surface boundary. Something below it." Cole is still for a long moment. When he finally speaks, his voice is level, but carries a weight underneath it that she hasn't heard from him before. "How long have you known this?" "I suspected it the day I arrived," she says. "The map in the main room, the surveyors Pete mentioned near the South Creek, today confirmed it." Something shifts briefly across his expression then, not surprise at the existence of the claim itself, but at the scale of it. As though he has spent years holding disconnected pieces of a story without ever seeing how they joined together. He looks at her across the table, not with warmth, not yet, but with the focused caution of a man adjusting his understanding in real time. He says nothing else that evening. But the following morning, when Ellie comes downstairs before dawn to start the fire, she finds Cole already at the table with the cadastral map from the wall laid flat in front of him, weighted at the corners with a coffee cup and a stone, studying it in the grey pre-light with the focused expression of someone who has decided to look at something he has been avoiding for a long time. He doesn't look up when she comes in. She doesn't say anything either. She puts the kettle on. She sets 2 cups on the table without thinking about it, and when the water boils, she pours them both. The rain comes without warning on a Thursday night in late October, the way rain comes to this part of Texas, not as a gradual building of clouds, but as a sudden total commitment, as if the sky simply ran out of reasons to hold it back. By midnight, it is hammering the roof of the Redstone house with a persistence that turns sleep into something theoretical. Ellie is awake when she hears it, not the rain, the other sound. A slow, irregular dripping from somewhere above the ceiling of the upstairs hall, distinct from the percussion on the roof, closer and more purposeful in its damage. She lights her bedside lamp and goes into the corridor and finds a dark stain spreading across the plaster above the locked door at the end of the hall. Water is finding the seam between the ceiling boards with the patient efficiency of something that has been looking for a way in for a long time. She goes downstairs and knocks on the door of Cole's room. He opens it in under 10 seconds, already dressed, which tells her he wasn't sleeping either. She points upward. He listens. He hears it. He goes to a hook near the back door and takes down a ring with 2 keys on it. He looks at them for a moment, not at her, just at the keys, with the expression of a man making a decision he hasn't made before. Then he goes upstairs, unlocks the door at the end of the corridor, and pushes it open. "Tools are on the left wall," he says. "Take what you need for the kitchen repair yesterday. I'll deal with the ceiling." He goes up through the narrow interior stair to the roof access without waiting to see if she follows his instructions. Ellie steps inside. She takes in the room in the way she takes in everything, systematically without rushing, letting the details arrange themselves into a picture before she draws any conclusions. It is not a storage room. It is a study, preserved rather than abandoned, with the particular stillness of a space that has been closed rather than forgotten. A heavy oak desk against the far wall, bookshelves with ledgers and rolled documents, a rifle mounted above the window that hasn't been fired recently, judging by the thin layer of dust on the stock. Framed survey sketches on the wall, rough, hand-drawn, clearly done in the field rather than a drafting office. The tools are where Cole said they would be, hung on a row of iron hooks along the left wall. She takes a hammer and a short pry bar and sets them by the door. Then she crosses to the desk. The documents are not hidden. They are stacked in the methodical way of a man who organized his papers carefully and expected to return to them. She does not disturb the order. She reads what is visible from the surface, the top sheets of several stacks, without lifting or rearranging anything. The first stack is correspondence, letters from Austin dated across several years, addressed to a man named Thomas Merritt. Cole's father, she assumes. The language in the visible portions is formal, legal, referencing a filed claim and a recorded concession, and a pending survey confirmation. She cannot read the full content without moving papers she has decided not to move. The second stack is survey sketches, more detailed than the framed ones on the wall, with measurements noted in the margins in the same careful hand as the correspondence. The land they depict is vast. She recognizes the shape of the Redstone property in the lower right corner of one sketch, small relative to the total area marked. The rest extends north and west in a territory that would encompass not only the neighboring ranches, but the water sources that feed them. The third stack is what stops her. It is a partial document, several pages of a formal land grant registration, the kind produced by the State of Texas Land Office with printed headers and numbered clauses. She can see the name Merritt on the visible page. She can see the words water rights and perpetual and registered in the county of... But the final pages, the ones that would carry the official land office seal, the specific legal description of what is granted and to whom, are not there. The document ends mid-sentence on the last visible page. Either they were never filed here or they were removed. She stands at the desk for a long moment with the rain loud on the roof above her, and Cole's boots audible somewhere overhead, moving with deliberate care across the wet shingles. She understands what she is looking at, the evidence of a claim, but not the claim itself, the shape of something significant without the legal confirmation that gives it weight. Whatever Thomas Merritt registered in Austin, the proof of it is not in this room. She goes back to the door, picks up the tools and goes downstairs to wait. Cole comes down 40 minutes later, soaked through and carrying a bucket. He sets it under the temporary patch he's made in the ceiling, checks that it is positioned correctly, and goes to change his shirt without a word about the study or what she may or may not have seen inside it. 3 days pass in the ordinary rhythm of the ranch. The rain does not return. The temporary patch holds. Ellie returns the tools to their hooks, and the door at the end of the corridor remains unlocked but closed, which feels like a shift in some unspoken arrangement, though neither of them acknowledges it. It is on the 4th day that Cole finds her at the kitchen table, with the supply ledger open and a separate sheet of paper covered in her own handwriting beside it. He picks up the separate sheet before she can explain it. His expression changes. It is not the ledger that changes it. It is the header she has written at the top of the page: Land Registry, Austin, Merritt Family Records, Public Inquiry. She had written the letter 2 days earlier and given it to Pete to post on his supply run. It is already gone. Cole sets the paper down flat on the table with a care that is more controlled than gentle. "You wrote to Austin," he says. "The documents in the study are incomplete," she says. "The final pages of the registration are missing. A public inquiry to the land registry costs nothing and can be submitted by any citizen. I submitted one. You went into that room and read my father's papers. You told me the tools were on the left wall," she says. "I took the tools. I also saw what was on the desk. I didn't move anything, I didn't remove anything, and I didn't ask you about it afterward. I am asking you about it now, because whatever your father registered in Austin, someone outside this property already knows about it. The surveyor at the gate wasn't measuring fence lines. Harding's man has been here twice in 3 weeks, and the document on your father's desk ends before it says what it grants." Cole stands at the end of the table. The morning light comes through the east window and falls across the floor between them in a long pale stripe. "The inquiry was already sent," she says. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you what I did and why." The silence that follows is not empty. It has texture, the particular density of a man working through something he was not prepared to work through this morning, in this kitchen, with this woman. "You had no right to that room," he says finally. "You gave me the key," she says, "and the door was unlocked when I left." His jaw tightens. He picks up the paper again, reads it fully this time, and sets it back down. Whatever he expected when he submitted a contract to a correspondence agency 4 weeks ago, it was not this. She can see that clearly enough. But she also sees, in the way he reads every word before responding, in the way he doesn't tell her she's wrong, that he knows the logic is sound. He leaves without another word. The second thing happens that night. Ellie is in the kitchen when Pete comes to the back door later than usual, with mud on his boots and a tightness around his eyes that is different from his ordinary expression. "Mom," he says, "you'd better come look at the well." She follows him into the yard. Cole is already there, crouching at the stone rim of the well with a lantern held low over the opening. The smell reaches her before she gets close, dry and mineral and wrong. She has smelled it before, in a printer's workroom where they used it to clean stone plates. Calcium oxide, lime. Someone poured it into the water. It would not kill a person outright, but it renders the water undrinkable and will take days of flushing to clear, assuming the source itself hasn't been compromised deeper down. In a dry territory where the next water source is 4 miles east, it is not vandalism. It is a calculated disruption of something essential. Cole stands up slowly from the rim. He looks at Pete. "Check the fence line on the north pasture tonight," he says. "All of it." Pete nods and goes. Cole looks at the well for a long moment without speaking. Then he looks toward the road, the empty, dark road that runs 11 miles back to Crale's Bend, back to the man whose name appears in the margins of supply invoices with a small, circled letter. "This wasn't a warning," Ellie says quietly beside him. He doesn't look at her. "No," he says. "It wasn't." She looks at the well and feels the shift in the air between them. Not warmth, not understanding. Not yet any of the things that take time to build between two people who came together without wanting to. But something else. The particular solidarity of two people who now share the same enemy and both know it. "He's not after the land," she says. "He's after what's under it." Cole turns toward her then. In the lantern light, his expression is unreadable in the way it always is, but there is something underneath it now that was not there 3 weeks ago when he picked her up from the Crale's Bend stage. Something that is paying close attention. He does not confirm what she said. He doesn't deny it either. He takes the lantern and walks back toward the house, and she follows, and neither of them speaks again that night. But when she passes the main room on her way to the stairs, she notices that the cadastral map has been taken down from the wall. It is no longer in the room at all. The letter from Austin arrives on a Wednesday, brought out from town by Pete, along with a sack of cornmeal and a coil of new wire for the east fence. He sets it on the kitchen table without ceremony, the way he sets everything down, with the practical indifference of someone who knows he is a messenger and not a participant. Ellie picks it up. The seal is the State of Texas Land Office, exactly as she requested. The paper is heavier than ordinary correspondence, the kind used for official documents that are meant to last. She does not open it immediately. She sets it back on the table, finishes what she is doing at the stove, and waits until Pete has gone back outside before she breaks the seal and reads. The document inside is a certified copy of a land grant registration filed on March 14, 1859, in the name of Thomas Aldis Merritt, resident of Crale County, Texas. It runs to 4 pages. The first 2 pages establish the property boundaries of the Redstone Ranch in legal survey language, north by northeast, chains and rods, landmarks she can now picture from having ridden the property edges with Pete during a supply check 2 weeks prior. The third page is where the language changes. Perpetual water rights, it reads. Subsurface aquifer access, including all tributaries, and underground channels located beneath and adjacent to the recorded property boundary, as defined in the survey of August 1858. Said rights extend to all parcels identified in Appendix A and are held in perpetuity by the registered owner and lawful successors. Appendix A is the 4th page. It is a list of parcels, 7 of them. She recognizes the Redstone property from the parcel number. The others she does not recognize by number, but by the descriptions, quarter section this, northeast boundary that, she can match 3 of them to neighboring properties she has heard named in conversation. One of them is the land adjacent to Crale's Bend itself, the territory through which any rail line running west from the county seat would need to pass. She sits down. She reads the document twice more carefully, the way she used to read survey plates before sending them to press, looking for ambiguity, for language that could be interpreted 2 ways, for the kind of loose wording that causes problems later. She finds none. The document is precise. It was written by someone who understood exactly what they were recording and intended it to hold. Cole Merritt is the legal heir to perpetual water rights across 7 parcels of land, including the aquifer that feeds Crale's Bend and the territory the railroad needs to cross. And not one person in this town knows it. She is still at the table when she hears his boots on the porch steps. He comes through the back door and stops when he sees her expression. She doesn't try to arrange her face into something less direct. There is no version of this conversation that benefits from delay. She slides the document across the table toward him without speaking. He looks at it. He looks at the land office seal. Then he pulls out the chair across from her and sits down, and he reads. He reads all 4 pages. He reads Appendix A in full. He does not rush, does not skim, does not look up until he has reached the final line and the certification stamp at the bottom of the last page. Then he sets it flat on the table and keeps both hands on it, as though it might move. The kitchen is very quiet. Outside, the November wind has come down off the plains and is working its way through every gap in the window frames with a thin, persistent sound. He knew, Ellie says, not as an accusation, as a fact that has just been confirmed. Cole's jaw shifts. My father registered this before I was old enough to understand what it meant. He believed secrecy protected it, said once that landmen only destroy what they can measure properly. By the time I was old enough to ask the right questions, he was already sick. Harding knows, she says. That's what the surveyors were mapping. That's what the lime in the well was about. It wasn't damage, it was a demonstration. He wanted you to know he can reach what you depend on. Cole looks at the document again. Something moves behind his expression. Not fear, not anger in its obvious form, but the particular tension of a man who has just had a long-held suspicion confirmed in the worst possible way. The lien, he says. The debt he's been holding. Legal leverage, she says. If you couldn't pay, he could petition for property seizure. With the debt cleared, that avenue is gone, which is likely why his approach shifted to the well. She watches him absorb this. He is not a man who moves quickly through information. He turns it, examines it from multiple angles, the way a rancher examines a fence post before deciding whether it needs replacing or pulling entirely. There's an annual grazing lease, a grazing lease auction, he says finally. First week of December. Harding uses it every year to conduct business in public in front of witnesses. He'll try to formalize something there. Then that's where this needs to be used, she says. nodding toward the document. In public, in front of the same witnesses, before he can frame the narrative. Cole looks at her across the table. It is a long look, the kind that is taking inventory of something. "You already thought about this," he says. "I thought about it while I was waiting for you to come in," she says. He is quiet for another moment. Then he folds the document carefully along its original creases and places it back in the land office envelope. "We go to the auction together," he says. "We say nothing before that. Nothing to Pete, nothing to anyone in town. If Harding hears this is coming, he'll move before we're ready." She nods. He puts the envelope in his coat's inner pocket. He does not put it anywhere in the house, not the study, not the kitchen shelf, not the locked desk. He keeps it on his person. She notes this without commenting on it. The second thing happens 2 days later. It is a Friday evening, cold enough now that the fire in the main room needs tending twice before supper, rather than once. Pete has gone to bed early with a head cold that has been building since Tuesday. Darnell is in the bunkhouse. Ellie is in the kitchen finishing the last of the week's supply organization when she hears the sound of paper moving in the front room. She goes still. She has not gone into the front room. Cole is in the barn. She heard him go out 20 minutes ago, and the barn is far enough from the house that his return would be audible. She moves to the kitchen doorway. Darnell is at the desk in the front room. He has a sheet of paper flat on the surface and a pencil in his hand, and he is drawing with the focused attention of a man who has done this before. She can see from the doorway that it is a map. The shapes are too deliberate, too measured to be anything else. The fence lines of the north pasture, the position of the well, the distance markers that Pete walked with her 3 weeks ago. He has not heard her. The fire is loud enough and he is concentrating. She watches him finish the north pasture boundary and begin marking the east fence. Then she steps back into the kitchen, sets down the jar she is holding without making a sound, and goes to the back door. She crosses the yard to the barn in the dark without a lamp, moving on the packed earth path where her boots make the least noise. Cole is inside working on a piece of harness by lantern light. He looks up when she comes in. She tells him in a low voice exactly what she saw. She does not speculate. She does not soften it. She describes the sheet of paper, the fence lines, the measurement marks, and the deliberate precision of Darnell's hand moving across it. Cole does not move for a moment. His expression does not change in any dramatic way. No sudden anger, no visible shock. But something beneath it shifts in a way that is quieter and more permanent than either of those things. His hands, still holding the harness, go still. Darnell has worked this ranch for 11 years. He was here before Cole took over management from his father. He knows every fence post, every water point, every weakness in the property's perimeter, because he helped build it. Cole sets the harness down on the workbench with a care that has nothing to do with the harness. "Is he finished?" he says. "He was still drawing when I left." "Go back inside the way you came," he says, "through the kitchen. Don't let him know you saw." She goes back. She enters through the kitchen, picks up the jar she set down, and resumes the supply organization with the steady movements of someone who has been doing exactly this for the past 20 minutes. When Darnell passes through the kitchen, on his way back to the bunkhouse shortly after, she nods at him without looking up. He nods back and goes. She hears Cole come in from the barn half an hour later. He passes the kitchen doorway, and she looks up at him. He meets her eyes for just a moment, a brief weighted acknowledgement that asks nothing and confirms everything. Then he goes into the front room and she hears him open the desk drawer. She keeps working. He comes to the kitchen doorway at the end of the evening, when the fire is low and the house has gone cold and quiet. "He's been passing information," he says. "It is not a question." "For how long, I don't know," she says. "Long enough that Harding felt confident sending surveyors. Long enough that he knew the water source before the lime." Cole is silent for a long time. She does not fill the silence. "We keep him," he says finally, "until the auction. If Harding stops receiving information, he'll know something changed. We need him to believe nothing has." She considers this. "Then we need to control what Darnell sees between now and December." Cole looks at her steadily. "Yes." Outside, the wind has picked up, moving hard across the flat land from the north. The fire snaps once in the main room and goes quiet. The night presses against the windows with the particular weight of a Texas November that has decided to make itself known. "You're certain about the auction," she says. "I'm certain about the document," he says. "The auction is just the room." She nods once. He turns to go. "Mr. Merritt." He stops in the doorway without turning around. "He trusted this ranch to someone who knew it better than almost anyone," she says. "That's not a small thing to find out." The pause before he moves is brief, just long enough. "No," he says, "it isn't." Then he goes and she listens to his boots on the stairs, and she stays at the kitchen table in the dark for a long time after, with her hands flat on the wood and the sound of the wind filling every silence the house offers. The first week of December comes in cold and flat, with a sky the color of weathered tin that sits low over the plains and refuses to commit to either rain or clarity. The kind of sky that makes distances uncertain and everything beneath it feel temporary. The grazing lease auction is held every year in the Crale's Bend Assembly Hall, a long, low building behind the church that smells of pine resin and old smoke, and is used for exactly 3 events annually: the auction, a harvest gathering in September, and the occasional circuit court session when the traveling judge makes his rounds through the county. Today it is filled beyond its ordinary capacity. Word traveled, the way word travels in small frontier towns, not through announcement but through inference. People sense the weight of this particular December without being told to. Ranchers from 4 surrounding properties are present: the Aldridge brothers from the North Pasture Territory, Old Man Cutter from the River Bend tract who comes to every public event and says nothing but hears everything. 2 men Ellie does not recognize who arrived the previous evening by private coach and took rooms at the hotel, well-dressed, carrying leather document cases, with the careful bearing of men who work in offices rather than fields, railroad men. She identified them when they passed the general store on their evening walk, not by what they wore but by the way they looked at the land, assessing it rather than inhabiting it, the way surveyors look at a territory they have already decided to use. Harding is already inside when Cole and Ellie arrive. He is positioned near the front of the room, with the practiced ease of a man who selected his spot before the doors opened, close enough to the auctioneer's table to command the room's attention, far enough from the walls to be seen from all angles. He is speaking to one of the railroad men when they enter, his voice low and his posture that of someone concluding rather than beginning a conversation, as though the important part has already been agreed upon. He sees Cole come through the door. His expression does not change, but his attention sharpens with the quality of a man who has anticipated this and prepared for it. Cole and Ellie move to the right side of the room without hurrying. Pete is behind them. Several of the ranchers nod at Cole, the economical greeting of men who respect someone without knowing them well. A woman near the back wall, the proprietress of the general store who has been consistently kind to Ellie since her first week in town, catches her eye and gives a small, deliberate nod. Ellie returns it. The auction proceeds through its ordinary business first. Grazing lease bids on the South Creek territory, the disputed middle pasture that changes hands almost annually, the eastern dry range that nobody particularly wants but several people bid on out of principle. The room operates in the rhythm of familiarity, men who know each other's limits and bid accordingly, with the occasional disruption of someone testing a boundary before settling back into what they can actually afford. Ellie stands beside Cole and watches Harding. He does not bid on anything. He is waiting. It comes after the final lease parcel is settled. The auctioneer begins to close his ledger when Harding steps forward with the particular timing of a man who has rehearsed this moment. "Before we conclude," he says, with a cordiality that fills the room without warming it, "I'd like to share an announcement that affects several properties represented here today." He has the room's attention immediately. Not because people like him, Ellie has noted that they don't, not exactly, but because in a territory where land transactions determine survival, any announcement about property commands an audience. He produces a document from his coat. He does not unfold it fully, just enough to gesture toward it as evidence. "I've reached an agreement with the Merritt family for the acquisition of the Redstone Ranch property," he says. "Given the outstanding financial arrangements between my institution and that property, and the mutual benefit to all parties involved in the regional development opportunity now before us." "There is no agreement." Cole's voice is not loud. He does not raise it. But it carries the way silence carries in a room that has gone still, and the room has gone absolutely still. Harding turns. His expression remains composed, but something behind it, is recalculating. "Mr. Merritt," he says, with the smooth patience of a man addressing an inconvenience. "The terms were quite clearly established. There are no terms," Cole says. "No agreement was reached, none was signed, and none will be." Harding's gaze moves briefly to the railroad men, then back to Cole. "I think there may be some confusion about the nature of the outstanding lien. The lien was settled in full," Cole says. "Paid to your man in town on the 4th of November, receipted and witnessed." A murmur moves through the room, not surprise exactly, but the particular sound of people updating their understanding of a situation they thought they already knew. Harding does not lose his composure. He is too practiced for that. He shifts his ground smoothly. "The acquisition discussion extends beyond the lien, Mr. Merritt. There are interested parties," he gestures toward the railroad men, "with significant investment capacity, and the Redstone property sits on land with considerable underdeveloped value. Value that, frankly, an isolated ranch operation is not positioned to realize." Cole reaches into his coat's inner pocket. He produces the envelope from the Texas Land Office and removes the document with the unhurried deliberation of a man who has been carrying it for 3 weeks and knows exactly what it says. He crosses the floor to the railroad men directly, not to Harding, not to the auctioneer, and places it in the hand of the senior representative. "The subsurface water rights for this territory," Cole says, "including the aquifer beneath the land your company has been surveying since September, are registered in perpetuity to the Merritt family, filed in 1859 with the state of Texas. The certification is on the 4th page." The railroad man opens the document. He reads. His colleague leans in. The room waits. The silence stretches long enough that even Harding's practiced composure begins to show its seams. The senior railroad man looks up. He looks at his colleague. Some wordless exchange passes between them. "This would supersede any surface acquisition," he says, to his colleague rather than to the room. "Without the water rights, the route is not viable," his colleague says quietly. "Not through this territory." The senior man turns to Harding. His expression has completed its transition from interested to simply done. "Mr. Harding, it appears the situation is not what was represented to us." Harding looks at the document. He looks at Cole. For the first time since Ellie entered this room, she sees something real move across his face. Not the polished cordiality, not the practiced patience, but the particular look of a man who has just watched the architecture of something he spent months building come apart in 4 minutes. He turns to Darnell. Darnell is standing near the back wall where he has been since they arrived. Harding's gaze is a clear instruction. Say something, correct this, provide the alternative account they had presumably prepared. Darnell looks at the floor. He does not speak. He does not move. He simply stands there while the room watches, and the silence completes what any words would only have complicated. His refusal to act is its own testimony, and every person in the room reads it correctly. Ellie steps forward. She has been waiting for this moment, not impulsively, but with the patience of someone who understands that timing is not incidental, it is structural. She opens the flat leather case she brought in on her arm and removes a single folded page. She carries it to the auctioneer's table, where the county clerk, a different man from the one who registers documents, this one with actual authority, sits watching the proceedings with the careful attention of someone who understands he may be needed. "I'd like to register this with the county record," she says. The clerk takes the page. He unfolds it. He reads it. His eyebrows move slightly, the first visible reaction from anyone at the official table all morning. It is the message she intercepted from Darnell. The hand-drawn map of the Redstone fence lines, the well position, the measurement markers, delivered in Darnell's hand, addressed in a way that established its destination clearly enough. She had kept it precisely, folded exactly as she found it, handled as little as possible. This documents the transmission of private property information from a Redstone Ranch employee to an outside party, she says, to the room as much as to the clerk. "I'm submitting it as a matter of public record." The clerk nods. He dates it. He signs his initials and adds it to the county record ledger on the table in front of him. Harding has not moved. He is still standing in the center of the room, and the room has organized itself around him in the particular way of people who are watching something conclude. Not dramatically, not with the sharp edge of a confrontation that could go either direction, but with the settled weight of something that has already finished and is only now being acknowledged. The railroad men are folding their documents back into their cases. The ranchers along the walls have the expressions of men who will be discussing this for a long time and are already composing the version they will tell their wives tonight. Cole comes to stand beside Ellie, not in front of her, beside her, at exactly the distance of someone who has made a choice rather than a gesture. He does not touch her. He does not speak. He simply takes his place at her side in front of every person in Crale's Bend who has wondered since October what the Merritt arrangement actually was, and the answer he gives them requires no words at all. The room understands. Harding looks at them both for a long moment. Then he picks up his document from the auctioneer's table, folds it with steady hands, and places it back in his coat. He walks toward the door with the measured step of a man performing dignity he no longer possesses. At the threshold he stops, without turning around. No final word comes, no threat, no reframing, no last attempt to reclaim the ground he has lost. He simply stands there for one breath and then he goes, and the door closes behind him with the ordinary sound of a latch catching, which is somehow the most definitive sound in the room. The assembly hall exhales. Pete, from his place near the side wall, lets out a slow breath that is just barely audible. The woman from the general store catches Ellie's eye across the room and gives a second nod. Slower this time, more considered, the nod of someone revising an opinion upward. Cole says nothing. He does not need to. Outside, the December sky sits low and tin-colored over Crale's Bend, exactly as it did this morning. The land does not change because the room did. But something in the way Ellie stands inside that unchanged landscape is different from the way she stood in it an hour ago. She does not examine the feeling immediately. She simply carries it out through the assembly hall door and into the cold air of a town that has just watched something settle, and she walks beside Cole Merritt through the main street of Crale's Bend without any of the distance that has defined every other walk they have taken together. The days following the auction are quiet in the way that only follows something loud. Not peaceful exactly, more like the particular stillness of air after a storm has moved through, when the land is reorganizing itself and hasn't decided yet what shape it will settle into. Harding does not come to the ranch. He does not send anyone to the ranch. He does not appear at the general store or the saloon or any of the ordinary posts where Crale's Bend conducts its daily business. For 3 days his absence is its own presence, felt in the way people speak his name with a new tentativeness, as if testing whether it still carries the weight it used to. By the end of the first week, it becomes clear that it doesn't. The bank informal closes without announcement. A handwritten notice appears on the door one morning. Temporarily suspended operations, it reads, in the careful language of a man who has not yet decided whether to admit the permanence of what is happening. By the following Monday, the notice is gone, and the door is locked and no one in Crale's Bend is surprised. The debts Harding held over 3 neighboring properties become suddenly and quietly unenforceable. The men who owed him money spend a few days uncertain whether to feel relief or suspicion before settling, cautiously on relief. The railroad men do not return. What remains of Harding's influence collapses quickly once the railroad withdraws. 2 creditors from Fort Worth arrive within the same week, demanding repayment on notes he leveraged against the proposed route expansion, and by the time the second snowless cold front moves through Crale County, even the men who once deferred to him at the saloon have begun speaking his name in the past tense. Without outside backing, his authority turns out to have been narrower than everyone assumed. Word comes through the county clerk 2 weeks later. A formal notice that the proposed rail route through Crale County has been suspended pending resurvey of viable corridors. The language is bureaucratic and bloodless and says everything it needs to say. Without the water rights, the route was not viable. Without the route, the investment had no purpose. Without the investment, Harding had no buyer. The entire structure collapses with the quiet efficiency of something that was only ever held together by one piece. Ellie reads the notice at the kitchen table on a Thursday morning and sets it on the shelf with the supply invoices, because that is where documents go in this house now and goes back to the stove. Darnell leaves before Cole has to ask him to. It happens on the morning after the auction, before anyone in the house is fully awake. Ellie hears movement in the yard when the sky is still grey and comes to the window to see Darnell crossing toward the gate, with a canvas bag over one shoulder and his hat pulled low against the cold. He moves with the deliberate pace of a man who has made his decision privately and does not intend to negotiate it publicly. Cole is at the back door when she comes downstairs. He has his coat on. He is watching Darnell cross the yard through the narrow window beside the doorframe. His hands are at his sides. His face is doing the thing it does when he has already finished processing something and has arrived at stillness on the far side of it. Darnell reaches the gate. He pauses with one hand on the post. "My son owed Harding money in Abilene," he says without turning around. His voice carries clearly in the cold morning air. "Started as gambling. Turned into something worse after that." Cole says nothing. "I thought Harding would own this place by winter either way," Darnell continues. "Figured if I kept my boy alive long enough, maybe I could settle the rest later." The silence that follows is heavy, but not theatrical. No one in the yard mistakes the explanation for absolution. After a moment, Darnell lifts the latch, steps through, and pulls the gate closed behind him. Cole stays at the window for a long time after he is gone. The morning light comes up slowly over the flat land and finds him still standing there, and Ellie does not go to him and does not speak, because some things do not benefit from company. She puts the kettle on instead, and when it is ready, she sets his cup on the table, and after a while he comes away from the window and sits down. He wraps both hands around the cup. She sits across from him. They do not speak about Darnell. Not that morning. Not that week. Not in any direct way. But she does not pretend he was not there either. She rearranges the bunkhouse assignments without being asked, accounts for one fewer hand in the supply calculations, and orders Pete a new pair of work gloves for Christmas, with money she takes from the household fund, without noting it in the ledger, because Pete has been doing the work of 2 men for a month and deserves at least that much acknowledgement. Cole notices the gloves when Pete holds them up at the supper table on Christmas morning, with the transparent delight of someone not accustomed to being given things. He looks at Ellie across the table. She looks at her plate. A week into the new year, on a cold Tuesday afternoon, when the light falls flat and silver across the frozen ground and the ranch is quiet with the particular emptiness of January, Cole asks her to come to the study. She has not been back in the room since the night of the rain. The door has remained unlocked. She has passed it daily and noted this without comment, but she has not entered again. He leads her in and opens the shutters on the east window to let in the grey winter light. He takes the partial registration document from the desk, the one with the missing final pages that she first saw in October, and lays it flat alongside the certified copy from Austin so that both are visible together on the desk surface. He shows her how they connect. The partial document, his father's personal copy, carries field notes in the margins that the official registration doesn't include, handwritten measurements and compass readings that Thomas Merritt added himself during the original survey, recording what he saw rather than just what the legal language required. Taken together, the 2 documents are more complete than either is alone. He has clearly been studying them since the auction. The desk has the organized quality of someone who has spent recent evenings working through a problem methodically. "Your father understood what he had," Ellie says. "He understood it better than I did," Cole says. "I knew the registration existed. I didn't understand what it covered until you sent to Austin." She looks at the field notes in the margins. His father's handwriting, careful and precise, the writing of a man who trusted measurement over assumption. "He chose not to use it as leverage," she says. "He believed the land should sustain the people on it," Cole says, "not be used against them." She absorbs this. Outside, the January wind moves across the ranch in long, low sweeps that press against the window glass and find nothing to enter through. She almost tells him then, almost says that she stood in this room 4 months ago and read these same pages in the lantern light while he walked on the wet roof overhead, that she has known the shape of his father's intention since October, even if she didn't have the legal confirmation until November. The words form and do not come out. Instead, she says, "The aquifer feeds the Aldridge wells too, and Cutter's property on the river bend." "I know," he says. "They should know the registration exists," she says. Not as a threat, just so they understand the situation. He nods slowly. I've been thinking the same. She reaches past him to look more closely at one of the field notation entries, a compass bearing that corresponds to the northwest corner of the territory, which she recognizes from a detail in the survey sketch on the wall. Her finger traces the line without touching the paper, and Cole is still, very still. In the way that a man is still when he is suddenly sharply aware of the exact distance between himself and another person, and finds it has become different from what it was. She looks up and finds him watching her. Not with the flat assessment of the man who met her at the Crale's Bend stage in October. Not with the guarded reserve of the following weeks. With something that has been building long enough that it no longer requires occasion, and has simply arrived in this grey January light, in this room full of his father's careful handwriting, and does not announce itself with drama because it does not need to. She holds his gaze, she does not look away. You knew, he says. Not an accusation, just a recognition. About the room, she says. About all of it, since before Austin wrote back. She is quiet for a moment. I knew the shape of it, she says. Not the proof. He looks at the desk, then at her. You could have said something, he says. So could you, she says. About any number of things. He holds her gaze for a long moment. Then something in him settles, visibly the way a structure settles when the last load-bearing piece is finally in place, and he goes to the desk drawer and takes out a folded sheet of paper and sets it on the desk between them. It is a contract. She can see the header from where she stands. Not a land document, a marriage contract, new paper, new ink, recently written in Cole's own hand. She can see that the first version, the original arrangement, the catalogue terms, the language of practicality, has been replaced entirely. The new document is brief, a single page. She does not read it in full, but she reads enough to understand that there are no clauses governing separation of property, no terms defining the limits of the arrangement, no language that treats what exists between them as a transaction. He sets a pen beside it and does not speak. She looks at the document for a long time. She looks at him. Then she picks up the pen and sets it back down without signing. I need until tomorrow, she says. He nods once. He takes the document and folds it and puts it back in the drawer. She goes to bed that night and lies awake watching the ceiling and understands that her hesitation is not uncertainty, not about him, not about this, but the particular pause of someone who has spent enough years surviving to need a moment, just one, to recognize the difference between enduring and choosing. She needs to feel the weight of the choice fully before she makes it, because it deserves that. He deserves that. In the morning, she comes downstairs before light and finds the contract on the kitchen table, unfolded with the pen beside it. He is not in the room. He has left it there and gone out to the barn, which is the most Cole Merritt thing he has ever done, and it is precisely right. She signs it at the kitchen table with the grey pre-dawn light coming through the east window, and the ranch quiet around her, and the pen steady in her hand. She sets the signed document on the table. She puts the kettle on. She sets 2 cups beside the stove. When Cole comes in from the barn 30 minutes later, boots dusty and jacket cold from the January air, he sees the signed document on the table. He picks it up. He reads it. He sets it back down with both hands flat on the paper for just a moment. The gesture of a man acknowledging something permanent. He does not say anything. He sits down across from her, and she slides his cup toward him and he wraps his hands around it. And outside the Texas winter moves across the ranch in slow, wide waves, and the Redstone house holds against it the way it has always held against everything, solidly without asking for recognition, built to last by someone who understood that the best things are made to endure rather than to impress. The spring comes in. The ranch rebuilds its rhythm with 2 fewer shadows in it, Darnell's absence, Harding's absence, and the shape that fills those spaces is different from what came before. Better fitted, less careful in the ways that carefulness had been a form of distance. Pete brings on a second hand in March, a quiet young man from the eastern county who keeps his head down and works without complaint and fits into the Redstone routine with the ease of someone who needed exactly this kind of steady place. The aquifer rights are made known to the neighboring properties through a meeting Cole arranges in April. Not at the assembly hall, not publicly, but at the ranch itself, at the kitchen table with the survey documents laid out flat, and Ellie present to explain the cadastral details to men who understand land, but not always the language that governs it. The Aldridge brothers leave with the visible relief of men who have just learned that the ground beneath their wells is not going to be sold out from under them. Old man Cutter shakes Cole's hand at the gate and says nothing, which from Cutter means everything. The summer is long and dry and difficult in the ordinary ways of ranching in southwest Texas. Fence work, cattle health, the constant negotiation with water and heat that defines this territory. They work it together, not in the deliberate division of the first contract, but in the organic distribution of two people who have learned each other's strengths without making a project of it. Ellie finds the cadastral map one evening in June, reframed and hung in the study rather than the main room. The red bordered area is still marked. Beside it, in the margin of the frame, Cole has written two initials in pencil, his and hers. She does not mention it to him. She does not need to. And then on a warm September afternoon, when the grass has gone gold and the sky is the particular deep blue that only appears after a long summer has finally begun to release its grip, a rider comes up the Redstone Road from Crale's Bend. Not Pete, not a supply man, not anyone Ellie recognizes. A man she has not seen before, on a horse that has been ridden hard and recently, carrying a leather document case across his saddle. He asks at the gate for the Merritt property. Pete tells him he has found it. The man asks specifically for anyone who knew Thomas Merritt. Cole is in the yard when Pete brings him forward. He listens to the man's introduction with the still, taking inventory expression she knows well. The man produces documents from the leather case, official paper, land office seal, the same heavy stock as the Austin certification she requested in October. She watches from the porch. Cole takes the documents and reads the first page. Something in his posture changes in a way that is too subtle for the rider to notice and too significant for her to miss. He looks up from the page. He looks toward her. Just briefly, just long enough for her to see that what he is holding contains something he did not know existed this morning. He says something to the rider that she cannot hear from the porch. The rider nods. Cole comes toward the house with the documents in his hand and the particular careful walk of a man, carrying something whose weight he has not yet fully measured. He comes up the porch steps and stops in front of her and holds out the first page. She takes it. She reads it. It is a second land grant registration, filed in 1861, 2 years after the first, under the name Thomas Aldis Merritt. But the beneficiary listed for succession is not Cole. It is a name she does not recognize. She looks up at him. "Did you know?" she says. "No," he says. She looks back at the page. The name is there, clear and legal and undeniable in the flat September light. A second heir, a second property, a second story that has been sitting in an Austin land office for a decade, waiting for someone to come looking. Cole looks at it with her. Neither of them speaks for a long moment. Below them, the rider waits in the yard with the patience of someone who understands he has delivered something that will take time to open fully. The ranch is quiet around them. The Redstone land stretches away in every direction, solid and known and thoroughly theirs. And somewhere in a territory neither of them has mapped yet, something else is waiting to begin.